My name is Claire Whitmore, and I was 32 when I received the invitation to the annual Whitmore Foundation Gala, the same event my father had hosted for over 2 decades. It was a grand black tie affair held every spring in the heart of New York City, where polished speeches and clinking champagne glasses mingled with symphony strings and whispered deals between powerful people. For as long as I could remember, this gala was my father's proudest tradition. It was where he celebrated his business accomplishments, toasted his closest partners, and subtly reminded everyone who really held the influence in our family. But never me. I wasn't invited as a guest of honor. I wasn't listed in the program, and while my name had quietly risen in other spaces, the tech sector, to be specific, my success was invisible in my father's eyes. Or worse, irrelevant. I had just closed a national education tech deal that had earned my startup not only funding but nationwide acclaim. Articles were published, interviews aired, yet not a word from him. No congratulations, no acknowledgement, just a formal gala invite with my name tucked under +1. It stung more than I wanted to admit. I told myself I'd grown past the need for his approval, that my accomplishments spoke for themselves. But deep down, that old ache surfaced again, that little voice wondering, why can't he just be proud of me? I arrived at the venue alone, wearing a sapphire blue gown and an expression carefully composed to hide the storm inside. The grand ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and designer suits. I saw him from across the room. My father, James Whitmore, standing tall with his signature scotch in hand, surrounded by his usual circle of old, money elites. His gaze swept across the room briefly, landing on me, a nod. That was it. As the evening went on, I played the role of a dutiful daughter. I smiled, made polite conversation, and mingled with donors, dignitaries, and corporate sharks. When people complimented my recent success, my father pretended not to hear. He deflected the topic to something safer, usually himself. At one point, an older guest praised the educational platform my company launched for inner-city schools. "She's making real impact," they said. "You must be proud." My father just laughed. "Claire's always been clever," he said, "too independent for her own good, but clever." That dismissal hurt more than silence. I excused myself and found a quiet corner near the back. I'd thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the night he finally saw me as more than the rebellious daughter who didn't take over the family company. The MC took the stage to introduce the traditional toasts. My stomach tightened. I knew the script by heart. My father would make his usual grand speech, raise a glass to his business empire, and perhaps toss a bone to my brother Evan for his loyalty and business acumen. I would sit quietly, smiling politely as I faded into the background. Again, he stepped up to the microphone. The crowd quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for being here tonight. It is always a pleasure to gather with friends, colleagues, and family." I barely listened at first, already bracing for the routine. Then something changed. He paused, looked around. "Tonight, we celebrate legacy," he said, "and while some chase unconventional paths, not all traditions need to be honored." That line hit like a slap. My chest tightened. People turned slightly, sensing tension. He continued, "I raise my glass to the ones who have stayed the course, those who have held the family name with dignity." His eyes rested briefly on my brother. Then he smiled and raised his glass. No mention of me, not my name, not my accomplishments, not even a hollow "and to my children." Nothing. Applause rippled across the room. I sat frozen, betrayed, humiliated, furious. My throat burned as I forced myself to stay composed. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. And then the unexpected happened. The MC returned to the mic, clearing his throat. "Before we continue, we have a special surprise. Please welcome New York's Mayor, Margaret Ellison." The mayor, now. I frowned, curious. Mayor Ellison took the stage to warm applause. "Good evening, everyone," she said. "It's an honor to join you tonight. I'm here for something important. As part of the city's initiative to recognize innovation in public education, we're presenting a very special honor tonight to someone whose work has transformed learning access for thousands of students." I blinked. "She's a visionary, a leader, and most importantly, she's one of our own." The mayor continued, "Claire Whitmore, would you please come up to the stage? Gasps, heads turned, my heart stopped. I stood slowly, every eye now fixed on me. My father's included, frozen in surprise. I walked up, heels clicking like thunder, and took the stage beside the mayor, who handed me a plaque and shook my hand warmly. "You've done something extraordinary," she whispered. I turned to face the crowd, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't just the daughter of James Whitmore. I was Claire Whitmore, guest of honor. What would you have done in Claire's place, sat quietly or spoken up? Let me know in the comments. And if this moment hit home, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. As I stood on that stage, plaque in hand and 1,000 pairs of eyes on me, a strange quiet took over my mind. Not the kind of silence that comes from fear or anxiety, but the focused stillness of long, awaited clarity. For years, I had imagined moments like this. I had fantasized about someone, anyone in my family looking at me and seeing what I had built on my own. Now, the entire ballroom had just witnessed it. The mayor of New York herself recognizing my work, my passion, and my purpose. The applause was thunderous, echoing through the chandeliers and polished marble like justice being served. I glanced down at the front row. My father sat frozen in his chair, his drink untouched, jaw set tight. My brother Evan stared wide-eyed, clearly blindsided. My mother, elegant in pearls and silent all my life, looked from me to my father as if silently calculating what this meant. For once, their power in the room didn't come from their name, their money, or their presence. It came from me, from the daughter they'd dismissed as too independent or too idealistic or worse, not practical enough for the real world. The mayor gestured for me to speak. I hesitated only a moment before stepping toward the mic. "Thank you, Mayor Ellison," I said, my voice even and clear. "And thank you to everyone in this room. Tonight means more to me than I can put into words. Recognition like this, it's not about ego, it's about validation, about knowing that what you poured your heart into made a difference. I created my platform because I believe every student deserves access to opportunity, no matter where they live or what school they attend, and I did it not because it was easy, but because it was necessary." The crowd was still respectful, engaged. I took a breath and added, "Some journeys don't come with cheerleaders. Some of us have to believe in ourselves when others don't. To those out there walking alone, keep going. Even when no one claps, even when your name is left off the program, keep going." That last line, I knew, was for him. For my father. And he knew it, too. I saw it in the way his fingers gripped the arm of his chair just a little tighter. As I stepped down from the stage, the room erupted in another round of applause. Strangers came up to shake my hand, congratulate me, ask questions about the program. Some even handed me business cards. The shift in energy was palpable. Just minutes before, I had been a forgotten name on the guest list. Now I was a highlight of the night. Still glowing from the moment, I drifted toward the refreshment area, needing a sip of water to calm the adrenaline humming in my blood. That's when Evan approached. "You didn't tell anyone you were getting an award," he said, more accusation than curiosity. "I didn't know myself until last week." I replied simply, didn't think it would matter. He scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. "Well, that was something. Thanks," I said, though his tone wasn't exactly warm. A pause lingered. Then he leaned in a bit. "You know he's not going to like this. I didn't do it for him. But you knew what this would look like." I turned toward him fully. "Evan, I spent years watching that man toast mediocre partners, pat you on the back for basic achievements, and pretend I didn't exist just because I didn't follow his blueprint. I didn't ambush him. I built something real, and the world happened to notice." He looked down, then nodded slowly. "You're right, I'm not used to seeing him." Outchined. "Get used to it," I said softly, not in a cruel way, but as a declaration of fact. Mom approached then, her smile tight and unreadable. "Claire, that was quite the moment up there." "Thanks, Mom." "I just wish you'd told us. Your father was caught off guard. So was I when he ignored me during his toast." I replied, sharper than I intended. "We're even." She sighed. "He's proud of you, you know. He just doesn't always show it. No, he's proud of control, I corrected. Proud when someone does what he expects, when they follow the script. I rewrote the story, and that scares him. She didn't argue. For once, she didn't try to smooth it over. She only nodded. After a while, the gala began winding down. Guests filtered out, buzzing about the night's surprise recognition. I felt light and strangely free, as though something inside had finally snapped into place. I no longer needed his permission to feel valid. The world had seen me. More importantly, I had seen myself. But just before I reached the exit, a voice called out, "Claire." I turned. My father stood there alone, drink in hand, looking older than he had just hours before. "Walk with me," he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. We moved in silence through a side corridor that led to the courtyard. The air was cooler out here, calmer. He stared ahead for a moment, then said, "You're making quite a name for yourself." "That's the idea," I said evenly. He nodded. "Didn't think you had it in you, truth be told." I looked at him sharply. "That's the difference between us. You waited to believe until everyone else did. I believed before anyone did." Another pause. "I was wrong to leave you out of the speech," he admitted. "Pride, stubbornness, maybe some fear." I blinked. "Fear? You represent everything I didn't understand." He confessed. "You built something I couldn't control, couldn't guide. That scared me." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was as close as James Whitmore would ever come. "Thanks for telling me," I said. He cleared his throat. "The mayor's right. You've done something extraordinary." A small, unexpected warmth bloomed in my chest, but I didn't let it sway me too far. Some wounds ran too deep to be fixed with one awkward conversation. Still, as we parted ways that night, I realized something vital had changed. He may not toast me. He may never fully understand what I've built, but he no longer had the power to diminish me. That I had taken back. When the gala ended that night, I didn't go straight home. My heels clicked sharply across the cold marble as I walked alone down the sidewalk, ignoring the offers of car service and post-event interviews. The sharp autumn wind whipped against my face, but I welcomed the sting. It grounded me, kept the heat in my chest from boiling over into something reckless. My father hadn't just embarrassed me, he'd erased me. In a room filled with suits, dignitaries, and powerful men, his silence about his own daughter's achievements had been louder than any insult. The next morning, I sat alone in my small apartment with a mug of now cold coffee, staring at the framed photograph on my bookshelf, the one where I stood at the ribbon cutting ceremony for the new youth literacy center downtown. That day, my father had been busy. He had always been busy. At some point, I stopped inviting him. I told myself I didn't need his approval anymore, but last night had cracked something I thought I'd buried long ago. I powered on my laptop and reviewed the speech I would have given if I'd been properly introduced. The organizers had assumed he'd do it. Of course, they'd said, "It's her father, who better to speak." I hadn't corrected them. Deep down, I'd hoped maybe, just maybe, he would surprise me. Instead, he'd thanked his colleagues, praised city leaders, and toasted the future of enterprise, never once mentioning the person responsible for the night's success, me. 2 days later, I received an email from the mayor's office. I blinked, unsure I was reading it correctly. They wanted to meet not just anyone, the mayor himself. It mentioned recognition, public service impact, and civic partnership. My heart pounded. I read the email 3 more times before replying with cautious enthusiasm. What was going on? When I arrived at City Hall, I expected a quick handshake and maybe a photo op. Instead, the mayor greeted me personally, inviting me into his office and offering tea. He spoke warmly and directly. "We've been watching the work you've done, Claire," he said. "The literacy programs, your mentoring efforts, even how you've been supporting small businesses through your foundation's grants. It's powerful stuff." I was stunned into silence. He knew everything, details only someone who cared would know. "We're preparing a new civic award," he continued, "one that recognizes unsung leaders, and we'd like you to be the first recipient." I nodded slowly, still unsure what to say. "Also," he added with a kind smile, "I'd like you to speak at our next gala. not as someone's daughter, but as the guest of honor. The words echoed in my mind, not as someone's daughter. My throat tightened. Thank you. I managed I'd be honored. The next few weeks blurred into a whirl of press meetings, invitations, and planning sessions. The mayor's staff coordinated everything with effortless professionalism, and for once, I felt like I was being treated based on merit, not connections. When the media releases went out announcing me as the keynote guest of honor, my inbox flooded. Colleagues, mentees, even former teachers reached out with congratulations. But the message I was waiting for didn't come. Not a word from my father. It didn't matter, I told myself. He'd had his chance. This moment was mine now. Still, the small ache remained. A dull throb just behind my ribcage, reminding me how much I had once longed for his simple acknowledgement. A week before the gala, I received an unexpected call from my mother. She rarely phoned unless it was about family logistics. I saw the newspaper. She said without preamble, "Oh." I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Your picture was on the front page. It's quite something, Claire." I waited for the judgment, the edge, the insinuation that it was too much or that I was showing off, but it didn't come. "I just wanted to say I'm proud of you," she added, voice unsteady. "Thanks, Mom." There was a pause. "Will your father be attending?" I inhaled slowly. He hasn't said anything. Another pause. "Well, I hope he does. He should see what you've built." I hung up with mixed feelings. Her words were sincere, but there was still that underlying hope that I'd be the one to fix things, that I would bridge the gap he had created. But I was done chasing approval. The night of the mayor's gala arrived like a quiet storm. I wore a tailored navy gown with gold embroidery, a nod to the colors of the Literacy Foundation's logo. As I walked the red carpet, cameras flashed, and reporters asked questions about my journey, my mission, and my message for the city's youth. I answered confidently. This time, I wasn't representing anyone else's legacy. I was standing in my own. The ballroom was dazzling, but I kept scanning the crowd instinctively. The speech was printed neatly on cue cards in my clutch, but my hands didn't shake this time. Not like before. When my name was announced, the applause felt different. Full, genuine, earned. I stepped onto the stage, took a deep breath, and looked out across the room. I spotted city leaders, nonprofit directors, former mentors. And then my gaze froze. My father was sitting in the third row. He looked older than I remembered, tired, but his eyes met mine, and for once I didn't see indifference. I saw recognition. Still, I didn't let my guard drop. I began my speech. I used to think visibility was something you were granted, that someone had to choose to see you, to lift you up, to give you a moment. I paused, letting the silence settle. But I learned that visibility is something you claim, you build, you earn, even when no one offers it willingly. The room was still, listening. I've spent years working with youth who were told they were invisible, that their voices didn't matter. I'm here because I refuse to believe that. I scanned the crowd again. My father didn't look away. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood, not out of politeness, but respect, true, earned respect. As I stepped down from the stage, the mayor greeted me with a handshake, then surprised me with a hug. "You've started something big, Claire," he whispered. "Don't stop." Back at my table, I was surrounded by colleagues and friends congratulating me, but I felt his presence before I saw him. "Claire," I turned. My father stood there, hands in his pockets, face unreadable. "You spoke well." He said simply, "Thank you." He hesitated. "Your mother's very proud." I waited. Silence stretched between us. "I should have said something that night. At the first gala," he added. "I didn't realize how much you had done. That's on me." I said nothing. "I'm not good at all this," he admitted, waving vaguely at the crowd. "But I'm trying to understand, if you'll let me." I studied him for a long moment. "Maybe," I said, "one day at a time." He nodded once and stepped back, letting me return to the celebration. Later that night, when I sat in my car, dress bunched around me and heels abandoned on the floor, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I wasn't someone's daughter standing in borrowed light anymore. I was Claire Morgan, guest of honor, and finally the author of my own story. The air in the ballroom had shifted. The aftershock of the mayor's unexpected recognition still lingered in the gilded silence that followed. As I made my way back to my table, 1,000 pairs of eyes tracked me, most of them uncertain, many of them reevaluating. My father's expression remained unreadable, stern, blank, unwilling to show emotion in public. He didn't stand or clap like the others. He just sat there with his glass untouched, refusing to raise it even after the applause began again, softer this time but no less sincere. I had always wondered what it would take for my father, Gerald Lancaster, to see me not just as his daughter, but as my own person, someone accomplished, someone worthy of standing beside him in the spotlight. I thought perhaps tonight would be the moment he might finally nod in my direction, if not with pride, then at least acknowledgement. Instead, it seemed my greatest moment only hardened his resistance. As the evening carried on, people came up to me one after another, business associates, donors, and dignitaries, congratulating me, thanking me for my work in community development, and most importantly, for launching the Education Access Fund that had helped hundreds of underprivileged students earn scholarships, yet all the while, I could feel my father's indifference like a weight pressing against my back. He didn't budge. Not when the governor shook my hand, not when the local news station asked for an interview, and certainly not when my mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin, overwhelmed by it all. What did he want from me? I had played the game he always spoke of, networking, image, success. I had done it my way, sure, but I had won. I hadn't just survived in the shadow of his legacy. I had built something of my own. Still, in his eyes, it was as if none of it counted because he hadn't approved of the path I took to get there. Later, as the gala began winding down, I found a quiet moment in the lobby. The clinking of glasses and distant laughter faded behind me, replaced by the steady hum of city traffic just outside the grand hotel doors. I stood by the window, watching as guests filtered out to valet. My heels pinched, but it wasn't the physical discomfort that made me restless. It was the emotional bruise of a father's silence. Quite the night, huh? A familiar voice said beside me. It was Aunt Rachel, my father's younger sister. She had always been the outlier in the family, a bohemian soul with silver, streaked curls and a sharp tongue. I suppose so, I replied, trying to sound less deflated than I felt. She nudged me with her elbow. You've had a hell of a year, and tonight, that was beautiful. Everyone in that room saw who you really are. I nodded, everyone except him. Rachel sighed and looked over at the ballroom door. You know, Gerald is a lot like his father, stubborn, proud, and obsessed with control. I remember when he announced he was going to law school instead of taking over Grandpa's hardware business. Grandpa didn't speak to him for 3 months. I turned to her. Really? She smiled faintly. Yep. And when he won his first big case, Grandpa still refused to say he was proud. Just said, don't let it go to your head. Sound familiar. Too familiar. She placed a hand on my arm. It's not you, it's him. He doesn't know how to deal with a daughter who doesn't need his permission to succeed. I swallowed, her words landing heavy. But why does it still matter to me? Because he's your father, and some part of us will always crave that nod of approval, no matter how far we go. The doors opened again, and the mayor strolled out with 2 aides. He caught sight of me and waved. Miss Lancaster, I meant every word, this city's better with you in it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, I replied, offering a smile. Rachel watched him go, then turned back to me with a raised brow. You realize your dad's probably never been that publicly praised in his entire career, right? I didn't want to outshine him, but you did by just being yourself. We stood there in silence for a moment longer until my phone buzzed in my clutch. A message from Jordan lit up the screen. You were incredible. I recorded the whole thing. Proud doesn't even begin to cover it. A second message followed. Your dad's ego will catch up eventually, if not his loss. I slipped the phone back in and exhaled. Maybe Rachel was right. Maybe I couldn't force my father to see me. Maybe all I could do was keep showing up, keep living out my truth until even the most stubborn eyes couldn't deny it. I went back into the ballroom to gather my things, only to find my father standing near the coat check. He hadn't left yet, our eyes met, and for a second I saw something flicker there. Uncertainty, maybe even regret, but just as quickly it was gone. He cleared his throat. Good speech. The mayor seemed impressed. That wasn't a speech, I said calmly. That was a toast, the one you were supposed to give. His mouth twitched. I didn't think it would be appropriate. Why? Because it would have meant giving me credit, acknowledging that I earned this. He looked around as if wary of anyone listening. You've always been determined, I'll give you that, but never brilliant or visionary or even just. Good job. My voice remained steady, but it had an edge I couldn't quite hide. He hesitated. I suppose I've been hard to please. I gave a sad smile. You think? There was another pause before he added, Your mother's proud of you, she told me. I nodded. I know she is, and I know she'd rather hear it from you too. He adjusted his tie, clearly uncomfortable. We'll talk soon. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe he meant it. But tonight had taught me something deeper. His silence would no longer define my worth. I'm not waiting anymore. I said, not with anger, just clarity. If you want to talk, I'll be here. But I won't chase you for something you should have given freely. He looked away first. Good night, Eliza. I watched him leave, my name hanging in the air like an unfinished sentence. Later that week, I received a package at my office. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, my childhood journal. It had entries from when I was 12, when I first talked about helping underprivileged kids, about starting a foundation one day. Tucked inside was a note in my father's handwriting. I read every page. I didn't understand then, but I do now. Dad. It wasn't a toast in front of hundreds of people. It wasn't public fanfare, but it was something. A start, and sometimes that's all we need. I stood at the edge of the gala's grand ballroom, watching the glittering sea of guests glide across the polished marble floor, their champagne flutes shimmering under the chandeliers. The moment I had imagined for years, being recognized, applauded, respected, was here, but not in the way anyone, especially my father, had expected. The air still buzzed with what had happened just moments ago, and though music played and laughter floated around, everyone was quietly processing the shift. I could feel their eyes subtly drifting toward me. For the first time, they weren't looking at Arthur Whitman's quiet daughter. They were looking at Cassandra Whitman, the woman who had just been called to the stage by the mayor himself. Just 20 minutes earlier, I'd been sitting near the back of the room at a table my father had intentionally placed far from the front, under the guise of you won't want the attention. I watched him clink glasses with board members, laugh heartily with political donors, and bask in the glow of being honored for his lifetime achievements. This gala, hosted by the City Business Alliance, was supposed to be his crowning moment, a carefully orchestrated affair to cement his legacy. But everything began to unravel when Mayor Lockhart took the microphone for what everyone assumed would be a tribute to my father. Instead, with an unreadable expression, he paused, scanned the crowd, and said, Before we honor Arthur Whitman this evening, I'd like to recognize someone whose contributions have quietly reshaped our city's small business economy. My heart pounded. I assumed he meant one of the up-and-coming entrepreneurs in attendance, certainly not me. But then he said, Cassandra Whitman, could you please join me on stage? A hush fell over the room as heads turned. Even my father looked confused, clearly not processing what was happening. I slowly rose, legs trembling, trying to remain composed as I made my way toward the podium. A few polite claps started, then spread, turning into a warm round of applause. As I reached the stage, the mayor extended his hand, then gestured toward the audience like he was unveiling something magnificent. Cassandra, he said into the mic, is the architect of the Women in Business Reinvestment Grant, which has helped over 200 women-owned businesses thrive in underfunded parts of our city. She's also been working behind the scenes to help first-generation entrepreneurs navigate resources most don't even know exist. Her innovation, integrity, and tenacity have set a new standard, not just for women in business, but for what civic-minded leadership looks like. He turned to me and smiled. The city would like to present you with the Community Catalyst Award, A gasp swept the room. I caught a glimpse of my father's face, an unreadable mix of confusion and something bordering on horror. He had no idea I'd been working with the mayor's Economic Advisory Council. I had never told him. Why would I? Every time I tried to speak of my work, he either belittled it or redirected the conversation towards something more impressive, usually about him. My accomplishments had lived in the shadows of his arrogance for far too long. As the award was placed in my hands, the weight of it was more than symbolic. It was years of invisibility suddenly given shape. When I stepped back from the mic, thunderous applause followed me to my seat. Only this time the applause didn't feel forced or polite. It felt earned. My father didn't stand, he didn't clap. He looked stunned, as if someone had yanked the curtain back on a play he thought he was directing, only to find out he wasn't the lead after all. After the ceremony portion ended, people swarmed me. Reporters, donors, entrepreneurs, all wanting to know more. My father stood a few feet away, surrounded by his usual circle, but he wasn't the focus anymore. For the first time, he was the side note. I noticed his tight-lipped smile, the forced laughter as people offered half-hearted congratulations to him and then turned their attention toward me. The shift was palpable, and it terrified him. I walked outside for a breath of air. The city skyline glittered under the stars, and for a moment I let myself feel the triumph. But as I stood there, the sound of hurried footsteps behind me told me the confrontation was coming. "Cassandra," my father's voice called out. I turned to see him approaching, his face clouded. That was quite the surprise. He said, not warmly, not kindly, just sharply, "You didn't think to tell me you'd be receiving an award tonight." "I didn't know until this morning," I replied evenly. "And you hadn't asked about my work in years." He shook his head slowly. "You could have let me in on it. You made me look like a fool." I stared at him. "You mean I made you look less important?" His jaw clenched. "You hijacked my night, Cassandra. This was never your night to own." I said. "You just assumed everything would always orbit around you." "I built everything you have." He hissed. "No," I said, calm but firm. "You built a company. I built a purpose. There's a difference." We stood there in the silence of the city's heart, the chasm between us wider than ever. For the first time, I wasn't the daughter shrinking beneath his shadow. I was standing in my own light. He seemed to recognize it too, because, for once, he had nothing more to say. Later that night, after most guests had gone, I lingered in the ballroom, holding my award while my team packed up some materials. My mother approached quietly. She had been uncharacteristically silent all evening, perhaps unsure which side of this unexpected shift to stand on. "Cassandra," she said softly, "I didn't realize. I mean, I had no idea you'd done all this work." "You didn't ask." I said again, less bitterly this time. She nodded. "That's true. We didn't, but I see it now. I see you." The words hit harder than I expected. They weren't grand, they weren't perfect, but they were something. As the staff began turning out lights, I walked slowly toward the exit, passing the spot where my father had once stood, beaming under the assumption that the world belonged to him. He was gone now, left without saying goodbye. I wasn't surprised. Some people leave quietly when they realize they're no longer the center of attention. But I didn't need his toast. I didn't need his blessing. I had built something meaningful, and for once, I had been seen. And this was only the beginning. The ballroom silence after the mayor's announcement still echoed in my ears as I stood near the floral arch, blinking away the flood of conflicting emotions. Around me the murmurs began to rise, hushed yet heavy, the same way water swells before breaking a dam. My father sat motionless at the table near the stage, his eyes locked on the mayor, who now held a glass of champagne raised in my direction. "Tonight we celebrate not just excellence, but resilience," the mayor said, his voice carrying authority and affection in equal measure. "Emily Walsh has not only led transformative community initiatives, but also exemplified what quiet leadership looks like in the face of invisible resistance." Invisible resistance. My chest tightened at those two words. No one else in the room may have known exactly what that meant, but my father did. I did. Every conversation where he steered me away from public leadership, every time he refused to acknowledge my proposals at board meetings, Every time he redirected praise away from me and towards someone more traditional. As the applause grew, I noticed my father's clenched jaw. His eyes were darker than usual, as if the spotlight on me burned into his pride. But this wasn't about revenge. I wasn't here to humiliate him. I was here because I had earned it, and even if he never raised a glass, the city had. "Would you like to say a few words?" the mayor asked, offering me the stage. I looked around. My mother dabbed her eyes, a fragile smile on her face. My younger brother, Liam, looked stunned, not in disbelief of my achievement, but in shock that someone had finally recognized it so publicly. Across the room, former colleagues, mentors, even the local press had turned their full attention toward me. I stepped onto the stage. The soft click of my heels against the polished floor felt like thunder in my ears. My fingers trembled slightly as I took the mic. I never thought this moment would come. I began, my voice steady despite the whirlwind inside me. Not because I didn't work for it, not because I didn't dream of it, but because I was always told that this kind of spotlight wasn't meant for people like me. I paused. The silence in the room turned reverent. I glanced briefly at my father, who stared down into his untouched drink. I was told to focus on support roles, to let others lead, to keep my voice low. But here's the truth. We don't need to become loud to be powerful. We just need to be true to who we are, even if others never cheer us on. Scattered applause, nods, even a few tears. This moment, I continued, is not just about recognition. It's about reclaiming the space we were told we didn't belong in. When I finished, the room erupted. A standing ovation. People cheered, clapped, whistled, and amid it all, my father remained seated, stone still. After stepping down, several guests approached with congratulations, photos, warm stories. But my eyes kept drifting to him. What would he do? Say nothing yet. Only the tension in his shoulders had softened. Later, as the crowd thinned and the evening mellowed, I stepped outside to the garden terrace for some air. The city lights flickered in the distance, golden and constant. A familiar voice broke the quiet behind me. "You were good up there." I turned. It was Liam. He leaned against the railing beside me. "Thanks," I said, wrapping my arms around myself. "You know he's not used to being outshined," he added, "especially by someone he never pictured on a stage." I sighed. "I don't need him to cheer, Liam. I just want him to stop pretending like I don't exist." Liam nodded slowly. "You made him look inward tonight. I could see it. That counts." We stood in silence for a while. Then, the sound of approaching footsteps made me straighten. It was him, my father. He looked uncomfortable, more human than he had in years. The usual veneer of authority peeled back, revealing something raw beneath. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the empty seat next to me. "Of course," I said, guarded. He sat slowly, looked out at the same skyline. "That speech," he began, clearing his throat, "was powerful." I said nothing. "I suppose I always assumed you'd stay behind the curtain. I saw it as protection. I thought I was shielding you from disappointment. You were shielding me from growth," I replied gently. "From respect?" He flinched, but didn't deny it. "I never meant to make you feel small," he said, "but I can see now how I did. The admission didn't mend everything, but it cracked the door open." "You didn't toast me," I said, even after the mayor called me up. He nodded. "That was wrong." I froze. I felt ashamed, not of you, but of myself, for not seeing it sooner. I looked at him fully. For the first time in years, his eyes held something vulnerable and real. "I did record a message," he said almost sheepishly. "I just couldn't bring myself to play it." I blinked, surprised. "You did." He reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a small flash drive. "In case you ever wanted to hear what I should have said." Tears threatened again, but this time not from pain. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded, stood up. Before walking away, he finally added, "I'm proud of you, Emily. I really am." And then he left me alone with the stars, the city lights, and a small piece of redemption that had taken a lifetime to arrive. Inside, the music swelled again, and I knew it was time to rejoin the celebration. Not just for the public applause, but for the private peace blooming in my chest. Because for the first time, my voice hadn't just been heard. It had been honored, and that changed everything. The morning after the gala brought with it a strange quiet. Not just outside, but inside me as well. A kind of calm that only arrives when a storm has finally passed. For years, my worth had been measured in silence, judged behind closed doors, brushed aside by those whose validation I once believed I needed. But now something irreversible had happened. People had seen, not just any people, powerful voices, respected figures, even the press. More importantly, my father had seen, whether he admitted it or not, something in his eyes last night betrayed him. I'd caught the flicker of realization just before the mayor called my name. That morning, I sat in my apartment, still wearing my gown's silk sash like a trophy belt. My phone buzzed nonstop, emails from journalists asking for statements, LinkedIn connections from industry leaders, and messages from distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years. One, from Aunt Sheila, simply said, "Your dad owes you a speech, and the world knows it now." Despite the recognition, a piece of me still lingered on the void left behind. Recognition from strangers could never replace the pride I had always longed to see in my father's face. I didn't want applause. I wanted acknowledgement. A "well done, Harper," spoken without sarcasm, a simple nod, a toast that never came. But now that the stage had shifted, the script of our relationship had changed too. I knew we would cross paths again soon. 2 days later, I was invited to a private luncheon at City Hall, an intimate gathering to discuss a local mentorship initiative. I was one of the speakers, now seen as a rising advocate for women in business and youth innovation. When I walked into the room, the mayor greeted me warmly and introduced me as a voice that challenges the silence of expectation. The phrase stuck with me. It was exactly what I had been trying to do for so long. Break through the quiet dismissal, the walls built from generational pride and unspoken disappointment. After the event, I received a text from my mother. It read, "Dad wants to talk. Please come by this weekend if you can." Just 8 words, but they sent my heartbeat into a sprint. Was it an ambush, an apology, another chance for him to disguise disappointment behind false compliments? Still, I went. When I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, memories came flooding back, the echo of slammed doors, the way my father used to walk out of the room when I mentioned my ideas, the way he toasted everyone else's milestones with champagne while offering me a glass of indifference. I stepped inside to find him sitting on the back porch alone, no wine glass in hand, no grand speech rehearsed. He looked up. "Harper, Dad," I said, cautious. "I suppose you're here for your victory lap?" He asked, gesturing toward the chair beside him. I shook my head. "No, just here to talk." He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "You were impressive that night. I won't pretend I expected it." "I know," I said. "That's the point." There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of wind rustling through the trees. Finally, he spoke again. "You were never easy, Harper. Always questioning, always pushing back. I thought that meant you lacked discipline. And I thought your silence meant I lacked worth." I said, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He looked down at his hands. "I didn't know how to support you. You weren't like your brothers. They followed the blueprint. You were building something I couldn't see." I nodded. "You could have asked." "I should have," he admitted. "But I didn't want to seem unsure. And I certainly didn't expect the mayor to mention your name while I was still trying to figure out what exactly you'd built." I studied his face, searching for sincerity, and to my surprise, I found it. Not an apology wrapped in excuses, but a genuine crack in the wall between us. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was giving it, to himself, maybe to both of us. "I saw the interviews," he continued. "You speak well, you command a room. Too bad you missed your chance to say so during the toast." I teased gently. He let out a quiet laugh, one I hadn't heard since I was a child. "I'll admit it. I missed the moment, but I'd like to make it up to you if you'll let me." My heart softened. "How?" He stood and walked inside, returning a moment later with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "It's not much, but I figure I owe you a proper toast." I blinked back the sting in my eyes as he poured. Holding up his glass, he cleared his throat. "To Harper," he said, "the daughter I misunderstood but who made me listen. You've built something not just impressive, but undeniable, and I'm proud, loudly this time." We clinked glasses, and for the first time in years, the silence between us felt peaceful, not suffocating, not loud with what was never said, That night, I stayed for dinner. Mom made her signature roast, and we sat like a family. There were still ghosts at the table, old wounds, years of miscommunication. But we didn't let them speak louder than the present moment. A week later, I was invited to be a guest on a national panel about leadership and legacy. As I prepped my notes, I thought about my father. His silence had shaped me just as much as his absence. It had taught me to speak louder with more purpose. And while I no longer needed his validation to define my worth, having it now was a kind of healing I hadn't known I still craved. At the panel, I shared this. I used to think recognition was about applause. Now I know it's about being seen, even when you're not the easiest to understand. Leadership isn't just about taking charge, it's about holding space for difference, even when that difference challenges your idea of success. Afterward, a young woman approached me in tears. My dad hasn't spoken to me in 2 years because I dropped out of med school to start a business, she said, but hearing your story, maybe I don't need to prove anything to him anymore. I gave her a quiet nod. Or maybe you already have. That's the thing about resolution. It's not always loud or flashy. Sometimes it's a quiet moment on a back porch with 2 glasses and 1 overdue toast. Sometimes it's being heard not just by strangers, but by the one person who was too close to see your brilliance. And sometimes it's realizing you were never waiting for a toast. You were becoming the kind of person people raise their glasses to whether your father stands or not. Time has a curious way of softening the jagged edges of the past. A few months after the gala, after the lunch at City Hall, after the overdue toast on the porch, life began to feel more balanced. I was still the same woman, Harper, the girl who had once stayed up nights sketching business ideas on scrap paper. But something in me had settled. The need to constantly prove myself, to scream in rooms where I was once invisible, had quieted. Not because the battle wasn't still important, but because I had won the most crucial war, the one within myself. When I was younger, I believed that value had to be loudly affirmed. That if someone like my father didn't stand up and call me exceptional, then I wasn't. I believed that if the people closest to me didn't acknowledge my dreams, then they must not be real. It took me years of rejection, of being misunderstood, of walking into rooms alone and speaking anyway, to realize something profoundly freeing. The power to validate your own worth is the most unshakable kind. My journey wasn't just about one gala. It wasn't about a single missed toast or a single triumphant speech. It was about an entire lifetime of questioning if I mattered, of wondering whether blazing a new trail meant burning bridges with those who never even tried to follow. And when the moment finally came, the mayor calling my name, the spotlight finding me in a room where I had felt invisible, it wasn't just vindication. It was transformation. The lesson wasn't that success proves people wrong. The real lesson was that success makes their opinions irrelevant. What I built wasn't an answer to my father's doubts. It was a reflection of who I was all along. The accolades, the articles, the applause, they were all external confirmations of an internal truth I had long denied myself. I was enough, even when unacknowledged, even when dismissed. What surprised me most in the aftermath was how the world responded to that moment. Messages poured in from strangers across the country, women, men, students, professionals, all saying the same thing in different ways. I felt unseen too. I've had someone sit quietly while I shined, hoping they'd say they were proud. Some were still waiting. Some had given up. Others, like me, had decided to move forward anyway. One message from a high school teacher in Texas hit especially hard. She wrote, "I played your story for my students during our unit on courage. One girl said, 'Maybe I don't need my mom to approve what I love.' Another boy said, 'I'm going to keep drawing even if my dad says it's a waste.' You've started something bigger than a speech." It humbled me. I hadn't realized how powerful simply telling your story could be. I hadn't realized that by reclaiming my voice, I was inviting others to find theirs. And that, I've come to believe, is the moral at the heart of everything. Your voice matters. Even if it trembles, even if it shakes the room, even if no one claps when you're done. I've also learned that sometimes the people who hurt us the most didn't mean to. They were just too afraid, too conditioned, or too limited to recognize the shape of our greatness. My father didn't toast me at the gala because he didn't understand the magnitude of what I had done. He only knew one language of success: predictable, traditional, easy to measure. I didn't fit it. That doesn't excuse the silence. But it does explain it, and now, months later, our relationship isn't perfect, but it's honest. We've had more conversations in the last few weeks than we did in the last few years. Real ones. He asks questions now, not to challenge me, but to learn. He's trying, and I'm no longer trying to make him proud. I already am. What I'm doing now is letting him catch up to the woman I've become. I think we all carry a wound like that. A parent who didn't see us. A teacher who said we'd never amount to anything. A friend who laughed at our ideas. A partner who didn't believe. And we carry those voices with us, sometimes letting them dictate the stories we tell ourselves. I'm not good enough, I'm too much, I'm not what they wanted, but here's what I know now: your value isn't up for debate. It isn't determined by applause or silence, recognition or dismissal. It lives in your courage to keep building, speaking, creating, even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. The irony is, the moment you stop waiting for them to see you, that's when the world starts paying attention. At the next annual gala, I was invited back, not as a guest, but as the keynote speaker. I stood on that same stage where my father had refused to speak months earlier. This time, he was in the front row, and when I finished, the applause came not just from the audience, but from my dad, who stood up and clapped the longest. But that wasn't the highlight. After the event, a young girl approached me. She was maybe 12, dressed in a blazer 2 sizes too big, holding a tiny notepad. "I'm gonna be a founder one day," she said. "But my dad wants me to be a lawyer." "What do you want to be?" I asked. She beamed. "A tech CEO, like you." I knelt down, looked her in the eyes, and said, "Then you already are." Because the truth is, we become who we are long before the world claps for us. We become it in quiet persistence, in the small choices, in the refusal to quit, and eventually someone sees it. A mayor, a mentor, a stranger, or maybe, finally, the father who once sat silent at the table. But even if they never do, it's still real. So here's my question for you. Who told you your dream wasn't enough? And what would happen if you chose to believe it was anyway? If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that silence isn't the end of your story. It might just be the beginning of your voice. And if you've ever risen in a room that tried to keep you small, leave a comment. Tell your story. I promise someone out there is waiting to hear it.